Hi, I'm Victoria Findlay Wolfe, and I am a designer for Sizzix. Today, we're going to look at making one of my favorite dies, the mini double wedding ring dies. Because I mean, really, how cute is this? And they're also very addicting, so just beware, because as you start to make these, you won't be able to stop. So if you make the king size quilt, just send me a picture. I want to see that. Okay? So here's the die. I ran it through on my Big Shot Pro, but you can use it on the Fabby, the Big Shot, and the Big Kick, or whichever of the Sizzix machines that you have. And what I really like here is that I got everything in one go. I can cut out a lot of different pieces in one set, and I'll show you the basic pieces that you need for doing the double wedding ring. So you have your center concave square, the small melon. You need 3 pieces on the pieced arcs that I'm going to show you when you're putting the arcs together. 2 end pieces, so we have all those pieces there. You need some little squares, and we also have the option of putting a full arc on the side of your little melons that we have. Here we have it with a pieced arc and with a full arc. So you can mix them up and change it around and put them together however you want to and get different effects. So here we were using solids and cutting through my scrap bin, putting as many different color combinations that I could together, using 8 layers at a time, running them through, and getting lots and lots of pieces to play with. So for today, I have a couple of the little melons already set to go. I'm going to show you putting one together with the full arc, and also one together on how to put the little pieces together. Okay, so now we have the pieces all laid out, and I can show you how we're going to put the pieced arc together. Okay, so as I said on the die, you have the 3 pieces that will go into the middle. You have the 2 end pieces. I'm using, solids, so it doesn't matter which way that I go, but there's 2 on the die because you need mirror images of the piece. There's a little slant that goes to the outside of the arc. And then you have the 2 squares, but I've sewn those already onto this side of the melon. So for piecing this together, we're going to just start with these. And one by one, right sides together, I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam, press the seam going one direction, and just continue until I get all the pieces sewn together. I do use a back stitch when I start sewing these, because of the bias when it's pulling. I don't want the seams to pull apart. Okay, so that was the first piece sewn on with the angle, which is the end of the arc. Now I'm going to put my 3 middle sections together before I finish with the last angled section. So I just showed you how to put the little wedges pieces together. This side I sewed the 2 end squares on, so you need 1 section of the pieced arcs to go onto the small melon, and then after we sew that on, then we're going to sew this piece that goes across the full arc. So anytime you're doing curves, you want to find your centers. So finger press to find your center. Same thing on your arc. And I will pin this guy. I pin at a 1/4 inch. And when I get to this end, because of the point and where you line up, okay, I'm going to put my raw edges together. And this little dog ear is going to hang over the edge a little bit, because right where this green and the blue intersect and overlap, that's my 1/4 inch. So that's exactly where I want to pin that, because that's where I'm going to start sewing. So that's where my stitching line will start, right where those 2 fabrics overlap. Then I'll sew to the first pin, and then I'll keep going from there onto the end of the pin, or end of the arc. Okay. This piece has more fabric, the floppy toppy, right? Belly on the bottom is the flat part. The piece with more fabric is always going to go on the top when you're sewing it. And now we can go ahead and sew that on. So I'll start at the beginning of my fabrics, take a couple stitches and back stitch to hold it in place. Then I can take my first pin out and sew to my first pin, keeping my raw edges together. Get to my next pin. And then focus on getting the raw edges together and sewing off to the last pin. And I'm going to give that a press, and I'll push my seams probably down, because I like to look at the fabric to see which way it's it's leaning towards, and it's definitely telling me it wants to go that way. So I'm going to let it go that way and press it flat. Okay, so we have the first arc sewn onto the small melon. Now we're going to put on the larger arc that goes with the squares on the end of it and sew it to the outside. So again, finger press, find your centers. We'll pin that to start. I call these patience builders. And even when you're working with these small pieces, you just have to take your time and grow a little patience when you're working with them. They're not hard to do, and after you do them, you realize just how cute they are. That makes you want to do more. So when I'm pinning, where the squares meet, I'm pinning at 1/4 inch into my seam, and I'm going to pin at 1/4 inch into the seam where I'm joining to, between the small melon and the angled section of the other arc. Those are the 2 points that you want to make a connection at. So where they join the melon and also your centers. And now we're just going to sew the same way that we did. Your raw edges line up, you sew all the way across, and then from the center onto the outside. Okay, so I sew to the first pin, and again, just making sure my fabric and my raw edges are all together, and I can zip to the next pin. And then I'll finish with my raw edges together and get to the other end. Okay, then we're going to give that a press. Okay, and then again, I'll press my seams to the outside so that all will lay flat. Okay, so we have our full melon together with the pieced arcs, but let me just go through it one more time showing you with the solid arcs to see how quick and easy they really are. Okay, so we're starting with the little melon, finger press, and let's pick this side, give that a finger press. Right, so every time when you're doing these and laying them out, one arc goes to the small melon, the 2 squares will go to the other arc. So we're going to sew these on, and then you'll see how that all fits together. Again, lining up for the little dog ear overlap so that you find your 1/4 inch sewing seam. So you can see too from the sample that you're able to mix these up. You can put a solid arc with the pieced arcs, or do one all pieced, or do one with all arcs, solid arcs. So it's yet another way to just keep mixing it up and making your own quilt and seeing what you're going to get. Start at my beginning and sew to the first pin. I have my floppy top. I have that extra fabric at the top so I can put my raw edges together and make the other fabric lay out of the way. Okay, so that's sewing the one arc onto the small melon. Again, look at the fabric. Let the fabric tell you which way it wants to be pressed. You can press that whichever way it's really lying. So it's laying this way, I'm going to press it that way. You know, depending on the kind of fabric that you're using when you're pressing, if this was a white piece and I didn't want that back shadow happening, then I would make the fabric press it going the opposite direction. You know, I would make it go that way so that I don't get that dark shadow happening underneath the light parts of the fabric. All right, so we have the first arc sewn onto the small melon. Now we're going to join the 2 squares on the end of the other arc before we sew that onto the body of this melon. Okay, so we'll put those little guys on, sew them at 1/4 inch. And then we'll just press the seams going one direction. Okay, so now we have that. We're going to find our centers. Give it a little finger press. Again. And the same thing, those 3 pins, pinning your center and then pinning where the squares join the melon. So pinning at 1/4 inch down in the seam, pinning at 1/4 inch on where the melon and the arc join at 1/4 inch. That way those little points will line up perfectly. If you pin it in place, they'll stay put. Okay, my floppy top, the piece with more fabric, is on the top, and I'm going to go ahead and sew that. Okay, and there's our finished melon using the full arcs. Aren't they just adorable? You just want to make more. That's just how cute they are. So now I want to show you how to put them onto the center concave square. Okay, so you get to play. This is time to play. You get to decide how you're going to put the layout, where you want the colors to fall. On this type of a quilt, anything goes. You can see that we've got every single color in the rainbow, and it's adorable. So let's just get right to it. So where do we start? Anytime we're doing curves, we find our centers. Okay, I'm going to do it on all 4 sides right away. Then I have my finger presses all in place. Okay, you can hit that with an iron or just finger press it. Okay, so now I have my lines. I'm going to do the same thing on my melons. Okay, so this is all the same arc that we've already been piecing. Okay, so this time, again, pin our centers. And where does this piece go? Okay, so there's my seam where the cornerstone meets the arc. This little portion is going to go 1/4 inch over the seam, because you're allowing for the seam allowance, and put a pin. Okay, and then you can always check before you start to sew. If you've pinned it properly and you line your raw edges up, there's no extra fabric. You'll be able to just sew from pin to pin, and your raw edges will be perfectly in place. Okay, so starting right at the end of that fabric where the green overlapped with on the arc, keeping your raw edges together. We're doing the same arc that we've been doing. Sewing to the middle, sewing to the outside. I'm sewing right off the end of that fabric. Okay, then we're going to press, and we can press the seam to the outside. And now we're going to add the opposite melon to the opposite end of the concave square. Now we have the first 2 melons sewn on. We're going to look at how we sew the outside melons, the last 2 melons, onto the concave square. What we're going to be pinning, so you can see this, is the seam where the square meets the arc and the square meets the arc on this side. Okay? So here you can see where the green is already meeting the yellow and the orange. We're going to be pinning through this point where they intersect, so that that point lines up on this point. And you can see that that's about 1/4 inch here, and we're going to pin at 1/4 inch here so that those seams line up. Pinning at 1/4 inch through the seam, and then we're going to pin through that point. It's also at 1/4 inch, because we want those seams of the cornerstones to match up. So we're going to put a pin in there so it can't move. So now looking at that, you look for the floppy top. We can clearly see that this is the way now that we're going to have to sew that. Okay, so we're going to sew our straight edge, and it's the same curve that we've already done. So because I've pinned that at 1/4 inch seam, as I'm sewing up to that first pin, I can see exactly where the pin went through the fabric. That's where I need my needle to hit so that those seams intersect. So here we have the finished full ring of a single double wedding ring. So now I want to show you, after you make more of these, how do you lay the quilt out to join it together? Okay? So I have some little cutouts that I'm going to show on top of this quilt that I already have. So if we consider that this is one of the rings, then you would add your concave square, and then another circle, another concave square, and another circle. That's one row of a double wedding ring. The reason you want to do this is this is your row. Okay? You're looking for the gentlest curve that you can make, because you cannot piece these as a hard edge going around on this side. Okay? Do you see that? So sewing this is a very gentle curve, all the same curves that we've already been doing. So this would be one row. Then the next row is here. Okay, so 2 of these full circles. with a concave square in the middle. That row gets joined to this row, and then you're pinning at those key points where the squares meet. Right? I'm going to pull this back a little bit so you can see where the seams are underneath, okay? So the squares are going to meet, the seams here to the concave squares are going to meet. Those are all the points where you're going to pin your rows together, okay, all the way around to the edge. That's your gentle seam for putting your rows together, and after you finish and you add your final one to the outsides, you've now finished your double wedding ring quilt. You've learned all the tricks that you need to. You've taken the fear out of learning your curves. You found that you can work in small portions and to make that curve not seem so difficult. And you've made something that's just completely adorable, and your patience level has grown. So go enjoy the curves, take it on, and let's see what you can do with it.